would not be subject to the shoreline policies that applies to other hazard land areas.
So, Mr. Chairman, I guess to Matt then. Matt, do you support the suggestion from LPRCA that that phrase be removed from 3.8.3, or?
Not removed, but that phrase would be added to that paragraph.
So I'm sorry, I must be misunderstanding. I'm reading at the top of page 48, Mr. Chair, where it says redevelopment or replacement of existing development may be permitted subject to the provision of safe access, and we all understand that. That's our access and egress policy that we're going to be seeing shortly, and to the policies of section 4.3. So are you suggesting further wording to that or less wording?
Just a moment, please.
Thank you.
I didn't see this word. Notwithstanding the policies. It's just the additional wording in that bottom paragraph that says, and notwithstanding the policies of section 4.3.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure I understand yet. I'm looking at the top of page 48, correct?
So the top of our page 48 is 3.9. So ours is the bottom of page
okay. That's
47.
Part of my, okay. All right, then in the bottom of page 47, I guess for staff, where it says, as I just read it, it says redevelopment or replacement of existing development may be permitted subject to the provision of safe access. And then I thought Mary told us, Mr. Chair, that LPRCA was suggesting that that last phrase, and to the policies of section 4.3 of this plan, could be deleted because it would make it more flexible for property owners. Is that what she said or not?
That's my understanding from Mary. That's what was said. I think it's would be more clear in that policy that there's a definite statement that the policies of 4.3 do not apply.
Now I understand. So you're suggesting replacing what is there with the words notwithstanding the policies of section 4.3.
Correct.
Thank you. And I'm sorry to make that so confused, Mr. Chairman, but I was. So I would make that recommendation that that word change be implemented as per the consultant's recommendation.
Councillor Brunton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did I understand, though, going back through you, Mr. Chairman, to staff, that they wanted 50 square meters, not 500 square feet? I really don't have a problem with that. Is that correct?
That's correct. All numbers in here are in
metrics,
so that's why.
Yes, so that I don't have a problem with that, but my understanding when we deal with these things, and Councillor Hyder can correct me here, the problem we want the people to go up because the bottom floor becomes, I go back to we want the foundation area or footprint not to change as much as we like them to go up because they get up above the floodplain or flood elevation for the 100-year storm, number one. And number three or two, if they get up, there's 3-story ones going in Turkey Point and Long Point, and the idea is too, they'll be less impervious if you, rather than spread it out on the ground, it's easier to take it up for stormwater and so forth. So it would reduce the chances of flooding somewhat, less roof area. So I think we want the foundation area or footprint area to be the, what's the word, the starting point. Is that safe to say? Does that sound practical? Rather than what they the other one says not to increase by, what, 500 square feet on the floor area. I don't like that because it's really restrictive. So anyways, said my piece. Thank you.
Well, part of that floor area becomes the second floor as well, and we've had that argument at the Conservation Authority. That's not something that I would agree with. To me, it should be the footprint on the lot. But anyway, Councillor Height.
Mr. Chair, I strongly feel that we're duplicating an issue here. The Conservation Authority will set the rules. The Ministry of Natural Resources has already given us a guideline. I brought this today. If we want to sit over and go over it, we can go over it all. I don't think that's required when we can just say, if approved by the Conservation Authority, Norfolk County supports it. We have a zoning bylaw in place to keep the building height down to 9 meters. We're having hearing board meetings at the Conservation Authority constantly. So what will this do? They'll send the applicant over to the Conservation Authority, who will in turn go to a hearing board, and then they'll have to come back here again for a minor, whatever they call those things. I can't even think of it right now. But it's just such a hassle of red tape and hoops to jump through. Why would we even go through that? Honestly, I've gone through other official plans. I have Brantford's one pulled right up in front of me. They wouldn't ask you to do such a thing. So why is Norfolk County doing it? Right? They have, obviously, we're not the only ones either with access and egress issues. And I have a very nice paragraph on theirs right here, section 10.2.5, that deals with access and egress. And yet, we have it in here 2 or 3 different times. I don't even know why we're going to send it to the province, and it's an issue that Mr. Baird's department is dealing with. I'm assuming this official plan could be a year or 2 before it becomes approved, and I certainly hope we have that plan by then. But, why is our planning staff bringing forward more regulations when it's already regulated? 4 Norfolk County councillors sit on the Conservation Authority. So what, will we be stuck in a position where we'll approve it over there and then come to council for the minor addition or whatever and then get it held up over here too? Or arguing twice, or even just sending the applicant to 2 different places is just, it doesn't make any sense to me. And I'd really like planning staff to come back with another solution. Other than me writing this whole thing out, because I'm not prepared to do that today. All right, Mr. Chair, other municipalities have it. I don't know why we were having such a hard time. So what solution can our staff give us on this one? Because I'm not moving ahead with any of it right now.
I was going to go to staff and then is there anything you want to add to that?
To you, to the chair. I'll be the brave soul that tries to answer that. With all due respect, Councillor Height, I think it's imperative that we have policies at the county. I think the things that you're referring to are guidelines and regulations that are as per the Conservation Authority, which are quite different than policies. There's also different processes, and I've heard comments from you about where they go through the circulation process and the Conservation Authority is recommending refusal and therefore county staff are recommending refusal, and that's not the case. If it's something dealing with safe access in Long Point or Turkey Point and it's a new build, such as what was proposed in Turkey Point on Cedar Drive a few months ago in front of council, those are times that Norfolk County planning staff recommend refusal because of safe access. If they're new builds, new properties. But if it's something like minor additions, which we continuously have, we have one going to Committee of Adjustment this Wednesday. We have heard comments from the Conservation Authority that they are not in support, but we look at our zoning bylaw, and if it's minor in nature, we do still support them. So I just wanted to make that clarifications that there are differences in policies versus guidelines and regulations, and I think that's a good example of how we're still moving development forward in Norfolk County.
Mr. Height.
Mr. Chair, the Brantford official plan, it talks about safe access and egress. There's a preamble paragraph. I won't read that to you, but I'll read the other section. The emergency plan works in conjunction with the flood warning system coordinated by the Conservation Authority for the Grand River watershed. It is a policy of the official plan to urge the Conservation Authority to maintain, update, and implement the flood warning system for the City of Brantford and for the City of Brantford to participate in it. For me, that works for me. Putting this in our official plan saying that we don't have the safe access and egress right now, and now we're stuck with it for 5 years or 2 years or having to put it back in our plan, doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. I feel this is addressing the situation. We know we have a problem there. We know we're working to resolve the problem. Why would we put it in our official plan? I have no idea.
Barry?
So at this point, we don't have that safe access plan. We've committed to getting that here to you. So staff is quite prepared to change the policy wording before we do the final adoption of the bylaw that will change the official plan, as long as that safe access plan that's coming before you soon does get accepted, that it is a safe access plan. So that's still in the works, and we haven't said no to making any changes here. We hope that that plan will be accepted, and then we can make those changes.
Councilor Brunton, did I have you?
Well, two things. One, the access egress issue, I agree with Councillor Height. Hopefully we'll address it. That recent development addressed it on their own. They had warning devices they're going to install in the buildings. To me, that's adequate. I mean, the rest of the people who live there for the last 150 years down there, they've dealt with that issue. I don't think we need to. I mean, if we want to come up with a policy of whatever we do down there, sirens or radio announcements, fine, but to me it hasn't been an issue. I'm concerned right now that we have a policy on this footprint and the floor area, if you want to call it, that's the same for both Long Point and our official plan. If we're going to write something in there, to have two different policies or wordings in there is nothing but confusion to the applicants that go through this process. So to me, you got to have, and I strongly believe the footprint or foundation area is what we should be dealing with. So that's what we want in our official plan. Irregardless of what Long Point's saying, we're going to change that if we finish off the policies out there any day now. I understand it's coming back in the next meeting possibly. I mean, and that's up to the board to change that. So let's get two of them the same. That's my recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Oliver.
Mr. Chair, just on that point, and that wasn't why I put my hand up, I was dealing still with Councillor Height's point, but just on that point raised by Councillor Brunton, I was the one that put forward the motion to change it from usable floor area to footprint. And the reason I did that was that allowing a maximum of a 500 square foot or 50 square meter increase in usable floor area, as it's defined, meant regardless of how many stories the cottage might have, you could go no more than 500 square foot increase. And that was not acceptable, at least to me, and a majority of council passed the wording to change it from usable floor area to footprint or foundation. And as Councillor Height has shown us, the MNR guideline on this very point talks also about footprint or foundation and considers up to, I guess, Councillor Height, I don't have it in front of me, maybe he does, but up to a 50 square meter increase in foundation or footprint to be considered minor. And that's good. That our policy in our OP then would reflect that MNR guideline, which I think is a good thing. And I would have assumed LPRCA would ensure its policies similarly reflect the MNR guideline. So that's why I don't support changing the wording back to floor area, because it will, number one, reduce the size that a cottage owner could increase their cottage, and it would prevent them from increasing the foundation potentially at all. And I don't support that, and I don't think a majority of council did. So that's just in response to that comment. I stand by what we did several weeks ago. I have no problem with changing it from 500 square feet to 50 square meters, because that's what we have in our OP. I should have thought of that when I put it forward. But Mr. Chair, back on my point about the safe access thing, the very bottom of the section 3.8.3, that wording of provision subject to safe access, I think, again, council approved putting that in there as a means of at least allowing for redevelopment or replacement of existing buildings. Because the old OP didn't allow it at all. This wording, and I think staff indicated they would go along with it, was at least going to say, assuming you have safe access and egress worked out, which we hope to have this summer when we get this report and a draft policy, then we would allow for redevelopment or replacement. And that's a good thing. So I have no problem with leaving that reference in there, because we are going to get that, hopefully this summer if we're lucky. Yes.
Councillor Height, were you done, Councillor Oliver?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have the policy in front of me, and it says a foundation area less than 500 square meters. Okay, that is called new dwellings, infillings. Okay, new dwellings in, and then there's the second section which says new dwellings, infillings with foundation area greater than or equal to 500 square meters. And for that one, it says, see new development, create new lot. And under new lot, they don't care how big you build it, it doesn't say. It says flooding hazard permitted provided it meets full requirements of flood protection standard and protection work standards. Incorporate dry passive floodproofing measures, wet floodproofing measures not considered acceptable. Must meet requirements of access egress standard. But there are no limitations like that. There are to some extent, but 500 square meters, because logically speaking, okay, if the two of us owned a cottage and your dad left you or his and mine left me mine, and mine was a 600 square foot cottage. Yours was 1,200 because your old man didn't get permits and just built on it bigger. So you could build a you could build a bigger cottage.
Can you turn
Does
your
that
mic
make it
off?
less safe? Does it make it any less safe? No, and I'm with Councillor Brunton. Second stories, that's when they pick up the survivors. First stories, yeah, they're in the basements, and that's why we don't allow basements. But to expand regulations, to take away from an authority that is the master of regulations makes absolutely no sense to me. It just adds another layer. If somebody can show me another official plan that does it, I'd like to see it, because I haven't found one. I pulled 5 or 6 of them, all lakeshore ones, and none of them say that. They all go with whatever the Conservation Authority, or work in conjunction with the Conservation Authority.
Councillor Oliver.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, could I ask Councillor Hyde a question on that point? And he makes a strong argument.
Go ahead.
Today, what is the LPRCA policy with respect to allowing replacement or redevelopment of an existing cottage in either Turkey Point or Long Point? What does LPRCA allow or not allow?
That's a trick question.
No, it isn't, Councillor, because we have wording in our document, in our OP now, at our direction as council, that we are going to allow redevelopment or replacement subject to safe access and egress. Elsewhere in the document, where it talks about being within a hazard area or a shoreline hazard, which of course Long Point and Turkey Point are, it says a building can be increased in its footprint by up to 50 square meters, if we change that metric. And that also deals with a replacement or a redevelopment of an existing building, right? So I could agree with what Councillor Hyde is suggesting if I know what it is that LPRCA is allowing with respect to replacement or redevelopment of an existing cottage. We need to know that. If we're going to take it out of our OP, I need to know it's dealt with somehow.
We do need to know that, Councillor Oliver. And one of the issues that we're having there right now is there is no policy. Okay, the policy that was approved is just by the Minister of the Environment approves the final policy, and I think that was done in '06. Okay, right now they use guidelines. The guideline they use, M&R, and they use the Lakeshore Management Plan from 1989. In the plan from '89, it said that Norfolk County needed to get the access egress issue dealt with. Okay, we haven't done that. I don't know that we must have written that into our last 10 official plans then, because it was known back then. But obviously it's got to come right now for some reason. But we don't actually have that policy. I can give you the guidelines, and we're working on the policy. And here's where we're running into the problem, is that the staff at the CA are bringing forth what is this draft policy document that we have in place. And they're causing these board hearings. But there is nothing to back that up, and we're having to rule on it as a board right now, and it's just causing a huge mess right now for us. But they do not have an approved policy. They do have a draft policy. We need to have another Section 28 meeting, and I'm assuming this is probably going to take a year before we actually figure it out, because what they're asking for and what the board is asking for are two different things, and it's really tied up everything over there as well. And quite honestly, I don't even know that we should be having the hearings at this point.
Councillor Brunton, then Oliver.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My understanding through you to Councillor Height is that those policies, we'll call them our policies, are going to be ready very shortly. And if we don't like the way it's written, we incorporate what we want based on basically what Councillor Oliver just discussed, the footprint or foundation area, 50 square meters, and that's all we need in there, to me, and that corresponds with what our OP will say. Is that not adequate if we tell our staff up there, because they don't have they're just throwing stuff at us now, and that's why we're having the problem. So let's get the two things the same, and we're on our way, are we not? The access egress will be taken care of.
Councillor Oliver.
Am I right or no?
Sorry.
Aye.
Councillor Oliver, then Hunt.
Thanks. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Height has given us a good, honest answer. If LPRCA is still in the process, and I can acknowledge this, of getting their redevelopment policies finalized, then I personally feel we should proceed with our OP update, i.e. the amendment, the change to 3.8.3 and the change to 4.2. Well, the change that we approved a couple of weeks ago in the 4.3.2.2. And then if, at some point in the future, the LPRCA policies are finalized and they are different or more flexible than what we have in the OP, I think Council should and could consider changing the OP as an amendment at that time to be more consistent. But if we don't have something clearly from them that we can defer and say we'll allow anything under our OP provided LPRCA accepts it, then we don't know what that is now. So I think we have to proceed on the course we've been on for the last few weeks to get these two changes made to these policies in our OP.
Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But why tie it down with two sets of rules when we could we know that if it's in a flood hazard or an erosion hazard, we're going to pass the application from our planning staff to the Conservation Authority for approval. If it's approved there, it should be good enough for Norfolk County. They're the experts. Other municipalities, that's how they do it. I don't know why we would have two different rules. If they give you the certificate to build, the permit, it's good enough for me at council level. Why wouldn't it be? Why would we fill our book up with a whole bunch of different stuff, and will we call for a second coastal engineer? And that's what I don't want to see, people have to jump through hoops and then jump through burning hoops, when we could just say, if it's approved at the CA level, we'll give them a permit.
I think things might get a little bit easier once we know this egress and access. That's one of the things that the engineer right now is looking at, saying we can't do anything because we don't know what that's going to be. I think that will change somewhat. And the other thing, somewhere along the line, I don't know if it's going to be at the Conservation Authority, and we've argued this many times there, but we're still not there, it should be the footprint, regardless of what that second floor is. So how are we going to deal with that? Well, I don't know. I'm hoping that the Conservation Authority will come up with something, and hopefully we'll have something. I thought I heard somebody say we might have it by the end of, or the last meetings in July. Councillor Black.
Just on Councillor Haight's last comments, I did email. I wonder sometimes whether, I know in this venue, if council decides something, it's council's prerogative to do that and overturn staff's recommendation. And the same thing with Conservation Authority. The Conservation Authority staff may recommend one thing, but the board may overrule that. I did ask Cliff Evanitsky a little while ago how many planning refusals were actually overturned by the board. Out of 13, 12 were overturned.
Go ahead.
They were basically overturned because of the access egress, plain and simple. Most of them, I'm going to say probably the 12 you referred to. But I don't have a problem with moving ahead with Councillor Oliver's concerns. If they're not in there, let's get them in there. And when we go back to the board at the LPRCA, we'll have to straighten it out with staff there and say, listen, here's what we've done on Norfolk County Council. Here's what we'd like to see in the policy, and you've got documents there from everybody else. I'm not sure I like 500 square meters, but, well, again, I like going up instead of out, but anyways, I'll leave it at that. And it's really it's the LPRC board's problem. It's not their problem over there. Anyway.
A while back, Councillor Oliver, you were talking about a motion. Do you want to deal with it now?
Well, Mr. Chair, I think the only thing that I'm prepared to move as a further motion today, and I hope staff will either agree with me or not. I know they put forward the idea of changing the footprint foundation back to the wording floor area, and I'm not suggesting a motion to do that. We've got a motion on the books that establishes as up to a 500 square foot or 50 square meter increase in foundation area as part of that policy in section 4.2. So I'm not going to put anything forward there. But Mr. Chair, with respect to 3.8.3, I would put forward a motion in the last sentence to change the wording as in the draft where it says, and to the policies of section 4.3 of this plan. I would change that to the recommendation from the consultant to notwithstanding the policies of section 4.3, which to me is far more flexible because it doesn't necessarily require that 4.3 be adhered to, if I understood Matt correctly. So that would be my motion, unless they say I've misunderstood again.
No, you were correct. Any questions or comments? Mr. Clerk, did you get all that? Okay, go ahead.
That the last sentence of section 3.8.3 be amended to read, redevelopment or replacement of existing development may be permitted subject to the provision of safe access notwithstanding the policies of section 4.3 of this plan.
All those in favor? That is carried. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I think we need more information on this. And I know staff are all in a hurry to get the official plan put through. I know the Conservation Authority is working on it, but it still doesn't sit right with me that we're rushing through this, kind of haphazardly doing it. I'd like to put forward a motion where staff brings back a report to us that gives us some options dealing with this, because like I told you, I've gone to other official plans. They don't have all this in there. They refer it back to the CA, and that's really what I want to see in this report, or at least I want some more options than what this is. I'm not prepared to type this whole thing out and reword the whole thing and hope the council decides. I think I'd like to have staff come back with something that's a little more palatable for me, that's for sure. So I don't know how I would word that motion, but I'm looking for an additional staff report.
Are you talking from our planning staff or from the Conservation Authority?
Our planning staff, because I know other official plans, they don't do it like this. I'm looking for something that's going to be less onerous and painful.
Pam? Or Mary? Or
Again,
Matt?
I'll be the brave soul that tries to
You're
answer.
going to breathe this over. Okay.
And Mary, Matt, please jump in. Again, with all due respect, Councillor Height, I would strongly suggest that we leave the plan as is today. Once the Conservation Authority has made decisions or there are changes, we can by all means come back with a separate official plan amendment and change policy here. But for right now, this is working very well for Norfolk County staff to move development forward in the county. And I would suggest we leave it as is.
I'm still moving that motion, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Can you give us your motion, exactly what you're looking for?
Sure, that staff come back with another report, I don't know, giving us more details and options while dealing with, I don't know, floodplain policies and hazard land policies. Or shoreline policies, all three of them added in.
Okay, we have a
It's just-
motion on the floor.
There are easier ways to do it, and we're taking the long cut is what we're doing. We're definitely not taking the shortcut on this one.
Councillor Wells.
Chair, did Councillor Oliver not have a motion on the floor?
Yeah, something different, I guess. I'm not sure one upsets the other, but Councillor Brunton.
Well, I respect Councillor Height as our chairman at the LPRCA, but I think that the problem we have isn't our staff or this council, it's the LPRCA board. We have to get a policy in place, and if it's voted to be more stringent than what is in this policy, then unfortunately, we might have to live with that. But I don't think we can keep holding up our staff. I think we've addressed it. I think Councillor Oliver's suggestions and the way staff have written things up have addressed the issue for the OP. Again, it's a LPRC board decision that we got to sort out, and hey, I think it's coming. I think it's going to happen very shortly. Thank you.
Councillor Black, then Councillor Height.
Chairman, through you to planning staff, just on this motion, any ideas how much this would cost, how long it would take, and how much work would be involved in doing such a planning study?
Got any rough ideas, Mary or Pam?
Through the chair, we aren't really clear on exactly what we're going to be doing, so we'd have to do like a terms of reference to scope it out, to understand. We would need budgeting, whether or not it can be done with staff, I don't know at this point. There's a lot of questions about this, so it's beyond the terms of reference in our official plan project.
Thank you for that, Mary, and based on that comment from Mary, I can't support this. This is just really confusing, the issue. It's not within the mandate of what we're doing right now. If it's something that council wants to do, perform later, that's fine, but let the Conservation Authority figure it out, and then we can deal with it later on.
Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pulling a paragraph from Brantford official plan here. This is what it says. Development will be subject to the approval of the Grand River Conservation Authority through the regulation of development interferences with wetlands and alterations to shorelines and watercourses regulation. The city will work with the Conservation Authority to coordinate the two approval functions to provide an efficient process. That's what I'm looking for, an efficient process. I don't feel that our planning staff have brought us enough wording to give me that kind of a sleep at night. Okay, what I feel is we're going to create just way more red tape, rules and regulations at so many levels. It won't even be worth the effort for people to build a shed on their properties down in these two developments. You know, it's been going on. We know what's in our old official plan. I would rather see that than what I see in this new one. But I'll wait, and if I can't get a staff report, I'm certainly not going to do this myself because A, I'm the cheapest county, or the worker that the county has, and I'm not going to do all this work. But I'm not going to support it either. I would rather go with what we had than to go with this stuff. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Oliver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand where Councillor Heidt is coming from. I truly do, and I think what he's hoping for is that we would have policies that are similar to what we did in our zoning bylaw with respect to development in and around wetlands. And if Council will recall, the wording in our zoning bylaw says that we will allow development provided LPRCA approves it. So we defer in our zoning bylaw to the LPRCA with respect to development around wetlands. And I think he's asking for the same kind of wording eventually in our OP when it talks about development and redevelopment in our shoreline areas in particular. And I can agree with that, absolutely. But when I pose my question as to what LPRCA's policies are in that regard today, the chair, Councillor Heidt, acknowledged that they're just in the process of developing those, and I accept that too. But for us to ask staff, I think, to come back with a staff report that looks at options until we know what the LPRCA policies are, that they will be implementing through their regulation, it would be premature for us to ask for that because I don't think we'd get anything that would be that helpful. So I would suggest that he hold off on taking that direction to staff until LPRCA has its policy more clearly defined, and we can then ask them to come up with wording that would allow us to defer to them, and we know what we're going to be deferring because they will have those policies firmed up. So I can't support the motion today for those reasons. I could support it 6 months from now or 12 months from now once LPRCA's shoreline regulation policies are clear.
Mr. Clerk, do you have a motion of Mr. Heidt?
That staff be directed to bring back a further report providing more details and options in regards to floodplains, shoreline plans, shoreline plans, and hazard land policies.
Did you say plans or planes? Floodplain.
Okay, we made that change. All those in favor? Those opposed? That is defeated. What's next? Anything left?
We have the recent submission about a expansion of the urban boundary on the south side of Highway 3 in Simcoe, just past the,
Oh, yeah.
it's for Nissan, I believe, the car dealership that's bought this property. It is outside the urban boundary, even though it is zoned, I understand, as industrial. Probably at some point when the province owned it, it was probably part of our garage that's in that area, just on the west boundary of it. So Pam's brought it up on your screen now, and if you just move your cursor just a little bit over, it's right. Okay, so it's, yeah, outside the urban boundary, but it's within the MR zoning. So any expansions, as you know, need to be supported by the comprehensive review, and there was a commercial review, which Matt has undertaken, and so I'm going to let him take over to let you know his position on this proposal.
This submission was accompanied with a planning justification report. I think the report does not deal with one crucial issue, which is the need for a boundary adjustment, and there's no information or discussion or demonstration of need for the boundary adjustment for that application. So I'm reluctant to support that. The commercial study that I did demonstrate that there's sufficient commercial lands within the Simcoe urban area for future needs to the year 2036. There are other parcels, I think, along the Queensway corridor that are of similar size to that application. A second thing about that application that needs to be addressed is that they're looking at the extension of services from Robert Blake Way to the dealership. And when I measured that on the GIS mapping, it's a distance of about 500 feet. It would cross the woodlot at the corner of Robert Blake property and Robert Blake Way, and cross the county garage lands and then to that property. And I'm not sure, well, it'd be the sewer and water services that would need to be extended. I think we haven't had any comment from engineering on the serviceability or whether they would support such an extension. It's I would think that this would be a matter that should be addressed through a specific official plan amendment. If they want to proceed with that, that would be probably the best way to go.
Mayor Luke.
Well, thank you, and Matt certainly hit on my question. When I read through this morning, first of all, I was aware of this whole situation, this proposed development. The thing that caught my eye was the words municipal services, once the services are extended. So I guess, I think Leah's left, yes.
Yeah.
I just assumed when I read that this development would be look at extending the services to the west. And if that indeed was the case, that would make sense to me to have this development, if it's on municipal services, inside the urban boundary. It's not a big extension to the west. It's only on the south side. Mr. Chair, if the services were available to tie into, I'm not sure why our planners would say this doesn't make sense to extend to the urban boundary. Are there other areas along the Queensway corridor that could be developed? Yes. But if a developer buys this property and is properly zoned for their development, why would we say he should have bought somewhere else? I really don't have a difficulty with this. Thank you.
Councillor Black.
Well, I do have a difficulty with it, and it's the process. Is what I said at the beginning of the meeting. It shouldn't be here. It should be a planning application, and what that would allow would all the comments of staff would come out. What I'm really concerned about is the neighbors. I know the neighbor that's right adjacent to it. He'd be very upset, and there's some other neighbors in the general vicinity as well that would be very upset if they weren't allowed their peace of mind and participation in a public planning session. I think this is one of the problems how I think council gets into trouble. We have, and staff have said, we have tons of commercial property already zoned. Why can't we direct people to those existing areas? It's not that I'm thinking about denying Nissan. You know, I'd love to have them come here, but we do have other areas that would be more appropriate, already zoned, rather than having to create something brand new. If they want to come, let them come through the proper channels. I can't support the way this is occurring. It's not appropriate, and if you want any kind of a motion to that effect, I would be more than happy to place it, but I'll let everybody else have their say first, I guess.
Councillor Brunton and Mayor Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, this is exactly the kind of thing we need. You know, I'm sure it'll be jobs, create some more tax revenue, but we are only adjusting the urban boundary if we approve it. They still have to come in and get it approved in terms of, what's it zoned now? Bush lot, or what's it zoned as?
It's zoned MR, which is rural industrial.
Okay, so they would still come in with site plans and all that information, right?
Yes.
So, you know, are there other commercial lands? I'm sure they are, but, you know, these things are important to the community. You know, if we scare these people off, it's wrong. And I think, again, they got to go through the process later on. So I support expanding this one. Thank you.
Mayor Luke.
Well, I realize there's not a motion yet, and I want to be careful not to debate it, but I really and truly don't understand how by moving the urban boundary, how we then are changing the permitted uses in the current MR zone. This industrial zone that's currently on there, whether it's inside the urban boundary or not, includes an automobile body shop, an automobile service, a repair station. So I don't understand by moving the urban boundary how we're changing the rules on the uses of the current zoning bylaw. I mean, my goodness, if I buy a resident that's next to an MR zone piece of property, surely to goodness, the least I would be worried about is a car lot selling cars. Somebody could buy it for a garage, repair vehicles, a body shop. Again, that's another debate for another day, and that would have to, rezoning would have to go through the circulation and the public meeting. I would like somebody to tell me how moving an urban boundary changes the uses that are there on the MR. How does it change the uses? How does that make that easier for me to put in a car dealership? Zoning dictates the uses. Thank you.
Well, I'm looking for a motion, I guess. Councillor Black.
Well, I'm not in favor of this, the way it's happening, so I'd like to put a motion on the floor to not accept the change in the urban boundary at this time and direct them to the full planning process where we can have a public meeting and everyone can have their say. And I agree with the mayor. I mean, it is zoned and the use is there, so it's there. That's not what I'm concerned about. I'm more concerned about following the public process and the residents in the area having their say. So that would be my motion.
Mayor Luke.
I want to ask this question, and I want to ask it as respectfully as I can through to staff. Do we have to have a public meeting, a circulation, a yellow sign to change an urban boundary? Is that a requirement of the Planning Act?
It's my understanding that that's not a requirement for any changes under this process, under the Fisher Plan review process.
Okay, thank you.
Pam?
What I would like to add on, just for clarification, Mayor Luke, is that the MR zone allows for a broad range of uses, including automobile body shop and automobile service repair station, but does not include a car dealership. And that's what's being proposed, and that's why it triggers the need for a zoning bylaw amendment, official plan amendment, and that's why they're asking for it to be brought into the urban boundary. So there is a little bit of a difference. If it was permitted as of right, they would have been allowed to just go through the motions under the building. Yeah, we're assuming that it's that way because of the garage, and that's why the MR zone is on that larger property.
Thank you.
Councillor Black has put a motion on the floor. Mr. Clerk, can you please read it?
That the request for urban boundary expansion from Nissan not be entertained at this time, and that the applicant be directed to pursue an application under the Planning Act rather than under the official plan review.
Councillor Oliver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you'll permit my question, it is relevant to whether or not I can support Councillor Black's motion. I'm looking at their justification report, and there were two sentences in there, and it's on page 3 of that document, if council will look at it. Two sentences, one that puzzles me and the other one that concerns me a bit. And it says the proposed development will make use of an underutilized site that is constrained by neighboring activities, mainly the county fleet and facilities garage. I guess I don't understand why our garage to the east would constrain the use of this property, for one thing. And then the other one that puzzles me is with respect to the services, and the mayor talked briefly about this. To support the proposed development, a minor extension of services will be required. If such a boundary adjustment is made now to our urban area boundary as part of the OP review, does that create any kind of an expectation that we as the county will be extending services to service this space? And I'm not sure who can answer it again. Lee's gone, so.
Unfortunately, yeah.
It's just a question I have. I don't know whether staff could help me at all with any kind of an answer to that.
Through you, the chair, to Councillor Oliver, we do have, first of all, on your first point, we're not sure why that would constrain that parcel. So we don't understand the comments in the justification in that regard. And your second point, it does outline in the official plan that in order to develop in the urban boundary, it has to be serviced. So I'm assuming that the developer would pay for that. But again, Mrs. Robinson's not here to confirm.
Okay. You've heard the motion that Councillor Black has put forward. All those in favor? It's Councillor Wells.
I was just going to ask a question.
Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, or Mr. Chair, just before we vote on this, by going through the proper channels, that is to apply, what length of time would the applicant be looking at?
Through you, the chair, probably 6 to 8 months. It's unfortunate that the owners purchased the property without going through a consultation, a pre-consultation in advance. We could have given them some good information in advance of purchasing the property. The other piece to consider is that there would be some additional information and justification required in terms of their application, which at their end may take some length, and that would be the justification of why commercial property is needed in Norfolk County in this particular area.
Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question to staff. Should this official plan thing move ahead tomorrow? You're saying that the applicant has to come back with an official plan amendment. How does that work while this one's in the process? Are they still able to do that, or are official plan amendments held up?
Through you, the chair, they can most certainly put in a separate application. A good example of that is Titan Trailer, who did their application to move their project forward while still having the request to have it in the official plan review.
And what's the cost for an official plan amendment?
Through the chair, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but it's over $1,000.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Black. Motion. All those in favor? Those opposed? That is defeated. Councillor Height.
I'll move we agree with the applicant and move that boundary, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Councillor Brunton. You were going to move that? Okay, thank you. Councillor Oliver?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to support Councillor Height's motion, and the reason I'm doing it is the actual boundary adjustment of our OP, I think, is something that does fall under the purview of our current OP review. And I agree with Councillor Black. There may be some concerns that are going to come up from neighbors, and they would still have to go through a zoning bylaw amendment at the very least in order to allow a car dealership to occur on that land, because it's not currently zoned to allow a car dealership on that land. So I think neighbors will have an opportunity in any event before this development could proceed to express their concerns, and council may or may not choose to support a rezoning application. So I'm comfortable allowing the OP review process to change our boundary adjustment.
Mary or Pam?
We just wanted to mention that if you just change the boundary and you don't change the designation, it will stay agricultural, and they would still have to come in to do an official plan amendment to change it to a commercial designation. So you might want to consider that in your motion.
Councillor Black?
Chairman, through you to staff, I guess during this process, the Ministry of Transport would be involved as well. And do they not have sort of a different rules on property in the urban area or outside of it?
Through the chair, that's a good question, Councillor Black. Yes, through the other planning application processes, if the designation and the boundary changes, in this instance, they would still need to go through a zoning bylaw amendment site plan application, which would involve MTO because they aren't in the connecting link.
Okay, and it would be up to them to give them an entrance permit versus Norfolk County?
That's correct.
Okay, I guess now, what are we going to do? In other words, I heard staff say that we should put something in the motion, I guess, that will not have to go through a planning amendment?
The way the motion reads now, Mr. Chair, it just changes the boundary, but it leaves the property designated as agriculture.
So can we make that change?
You might want to consider making a change.
In the motion? Okay. Councillor Height?
We can add that.
Just give the clerk a few minutes here to... Go ahead.
Are you going to zone it resort residential? What are you going to zone it?
It would be designated commercial.
Ooh. Is it still highway commercial, that property designated, or not? Is that the question you were asking?
To the chair, the property is designated agriculture right now. What's next to it is institutional, but as you go further along Highway 3, you get to service commercial, I believe, and that's probably the designation that you want. Just commercial,
Highway
sorry, it's just commercial.
Highway commercial, or just commercial? Just commercial. You ready? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Clerk.
That the request for urban boundary change for part of Lot 16 in the township of Woodhouse in the county of Norfolk be approved, and that the property be zoned commercial. Sorry, I grabbed that from...
Designated. Okay, all those in favor? Those opposed? That is carried.
Yeah, oh, in the Gore, oh, sorry, yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Pam?
I would suggest that the floor is open if there's any other comments, but from a staff perspective, the only other recommendation or resolution that we would like to ask council to consider is that the draft amendments to the official plan, and we would say track changes incorporating the changes from today's date, be forwarded to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing for review and comment.
Okay. Mayor Luke,
I would put that into a resolution, and may I speak to it?
you may.
We know we're not going to be 100% here. We know the ministry will have the final approval. We know that this is an ongoing process. We know that from time to time we have to go back and make changes in our official plans, our zoning bylaws, et cetera, et cetera.